Button. There, I hope that's better now. Sorry. Too many buttons. Um, can everyone hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? How about now? I'm kidding. Please, if you do actually hear me, say hi. I'd appreciate it. Yes? No? So anyways, um, where was I? Totally lost my brain now. Not that that was very hard because my brain seems to turn off semi-regularly. So, yeah, we're good. I think we're good. Hello, Weird Desk, and Lisa, and Juju, and yay! I hear I'm on. Good. So, no matter how you're hearing me, do say hello. I appreciate it, and I just want to thank you for joining me here. It's just super duper cool that y'all want to tune in and say hello and join in my journey with me. Now, if you do want to support the show in ways other than listening to the podcast or on YouTube or TFR, I do have an Etsy store. It is www.etsy.com/shop/monarch MTN Studio. And I'll include a link to that in the show notes, of course. And the call line is open, so if you wanted to give me a shout, hello and a holler, that number is 213-233-3998. Or if you're over across the pond in the UK, it is 44203-393-2871. So, we had fun last week with Gidget on Friday, and thank you for putting up with a pre-record on Friday. I was having a really good time, but apparently nobody else could hear me, so yeah, technology. It's a good time. Yeah. Actually, technology is a good time. I love it. Because I read a lot, and I like to take all my books with me. So, last week we talked about what not to say to someone who is pagan, and it's kind of a lot of information there because, just like any other non-obvious thing, you don't walk up to people who are a little heavy and say, hey, when's the baby due? You don't assume things. I remember one time when I was in junior high, middle school, something like that. I was out at Christmas shopping for my sisters with my dad, and I was unloading the cart onto the conveyor belt, and my dad goes, hey, are you going to pay for all that? I'm like, no, you got all the money. And the cashier goes, well, our husband's fun. It's like, oh my gosh, do I look that old? I think I was 12 or 13. My dad was, 20 years older. So yeah, good times, good times. So just be cautious of what you say. Don't make assumptions about someone. Now, I've every so often I'll see someone with a really neat tattoo that looks like it could be pagan. And generally I just say, hey, where'd you get your tattoo? What's it mean? And from there is just a really good conversation often. So, moving from then into now, I'm reading a book called The Inner Temple of Witchcraft by Christopher Penjack. And some really good information in there. And it's just kind of talking about the spiritual self first. And there's some exercises in it that you can kind of work through, and just some fun things in it. So I recently went through the various traditions part of the book, and so I kind of wanted to go over that tonight because there are a lot of different traditions and not necessarily a lot of information about the various traditions. And then a lot of them are not going to be noted or as formalized as others. I know, for instance, the Church of Satan, I think, just gained tax 501c3 status, so it's an officially recognized religion now in the U.S. Sure, go for it. I've got mixed feelings on that one, just because, really, Church of Satan? But you know what? People believe, and for the most part, if you ever read their particular literature, it's basically don't be a jerk and be nice to everybody else, and let them do their own thing. Really boiling it down, there's more to it than that, of course. But yeah, it's just kind of an interesting, different thing. It seems like as we get further and further into this century, people are becoming more and more accepting of non-traditional paths as far as the last couple millennia ago. And so paganism is definitely on a resurgence. I know across into Europe. There are some new churches being built, Norse churches, or North Pantheon, and I think that's awesome. I think it's great that there's all these roots that people are reconnecting to, and yeah, it's cool. I think it's a great movement. So for those of you on YouTube, this is the book, The Inner Temple, and I'm gonna just kind of read from the book itself because he's got good words, and why would I want to change it? But basically, there's a little paragraph here about personal freedom, and I think is great because I think people in general, not just witches and pagans, are seeking to find some freedom from dogma, the freedom to personally delve into the mysteries of the divine and find our own answers. I think we're starting to get kind of tired of people telling us what to do, because I don't like being told what to do at all, at all. And I would just as soon, people, find their own path, find their own truth, because it's going to be a little bit different for each of us. And so just some good information in here. And there's the first one, just to start, is the Alexandrian tradition, and is founded by Alex Sanders. So it's very similar to the Gardnerian style of Wicca. And Sanders claims to have his own brand, I can't talk, sorry guys, of witchcraft, which was given to him by his grandmother, but in truth, very similar to Gardner's. And his previous background in ceremonial magic added to the evolution of the craft, and as a natural showman, he attracted quite a number of people to witchcraft. So Sanders was often called the king of witches within his particular tradition, but not recognized as a king in other traditions of witchcraft. It was simply an honorary title given by those in his particular lineage. Now, lineage is basically the people who are learning in that one tradition, that path. And but like Gardnerian covens, Alexandrian covens have survived to the present era, and one has to be initiated into an existing coven to claim that particular lineage. So I think that's important to note as we're talking about the traditions, is you can learn some things on your own. You can actually learn a lot on your own. But to become part of a specific tradition, you do need to go through the initiation into that particular path or tradition. So if you're learning, say, the Gardnerian Wiccan path, you're not necessarily of that lineage or fully embracing in that tradition if you have not been initiated. That's just an example. And so as you're doing your research and such into the different paths, you need to check that. Is there someone nearby that can guide you a little bit or be your mentor? Or do you need to reach across the internet to find someone? And that may be a thing. You do need to do some research, just not just into your path to learn some things, but just in general too. So the next one is Cabot, or Cabot, depending on your pronunciation. So a longtime public witch, Laurie Cabot, established two traditions which were intertwined together. Her very first was Witchcraft as a Science, looks at witchcraft from a practical, analytical point of view, while her Cabot tradition focuses on the religion. She views it as a pre-Gardnerian tradition based on her original training, genetic memory, Celtic heritage, and her own inspiration. So basically, she found some things that she liked and some things she didn't like, and founded a brand new tradition, which is cool. A lot of work, but very cool. Celtic is one that I think probably a large majority of contemporary pagans and witches have some sort of affiliation with, whether it's the pantheon or some of the practices or some of the imagery of it. Just because Celtic traditions have really, I think, impacted the pagan world a lot. So have Norse, for that matter. But So Celtic witchcraft is not a specific tradition in the sense of a formal lineage, but denotes one practicing witchcraft with a distinctive, if not exclusive, Celtic flavor. Rituals, myths, and god forms are chosen from Celtic lore and often based on scant information of the Druidic tradition. So, with the Druids, just on a side note there, they felt that if it was truly something important, something worth remembering, and having for posterity, it was not to be written down. The things you could conveniently forget, those you could write down so you wouldn't have to remember them, because they had a very, very strong oral tradition. And while that was pretty awesome for them, for those of us, centuries later, that's information that we've lost, and that's lore that we've lost, and that's kind of sad. So, I suppose it could still be found, some of it. We don't know, as there are new archaeological digs all the time, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was some information that's been handed down from father to son, mother to daughter, kind of a thing. We just haven't found it yet, or it's just not published yet. Maybe it never will be, maybe it will. I don't know, but it's the downside of not having some sort of written record. That's why having a journal is very important. I think that's more important than a book of shadows, to be honest, because a journal you can put anything in. Really enter anything. Let's see. The next one is Christian Wicca. Even though wasn't originally considered part of the pagan path, there's a certain emergence right now of Christian Wicca, and often eclectic witches have no reason to leave behind their original Christian faith, and instead incorporate elements of both their personal traditions and their Christian faith into one. And so folk magic itself survived by veiling itself in Christianity and incorporating the mythology. Unfortunately, Christian witches do get curious looks from pagans who have renounced Christianity and see the two as incompatible. And, there is a lot to that. A lot of folks do feel that if you are pagan, or a witch, you cannot be Christian, or if you're Christian, you can't be a witch. And I don't know that that's necessarily a true thing, honestly. Mostly because the Jewish the Jewish traditions and the old temple traditions, they had priests that could do works of the miraculous. They were considered miracles rather than magic, but it's still the same thing basically, and it's, I don't know. I think it's very compatible. You don't have to have one or the other. I think you could definitely have both. It's a different path to walk, and you're not going to be understood by probably both sides of it. But that's where finding like-minded people to be around and to kind of not necessarily have a coven per se, but at least a circle, or your knitting circle. To discuss your faith and to keep you on that path. The next one is the Dianic. Now, Dianic traditions are considered a branch of feminist Wicca, which honor the goddess of the moon and hunt, Diana, known as Artemis to the Greeks. Dianic covens are often made up exclusively of women, and some are exclusively lesbian as well. Usually, these covens focus their energy on the goddess as the great mother and creator. Now, it is important to note that not all feminist traditions are necessarily Dianic. And this is true. So, there is a Dianic coven in my region, and I do not believe in excluding the masculine part of the deity or anything like that. I think they both need to be recognized and observed. You can't favor one over the other because that creates an imbalance. Now, I can see believing in Diana or Artemis, absolutely, but I don't know. Personally, I am not one of the Dianic tradition. I guess I prefer equality, I guess. So the next is fairy. So this is a tradition founded by Victor Anderson and Gwydion Penderfan. And Anderson was initiated into a loosely organized coven of witches in Oregon at about age 9. They called themselves fairies, and he learned their magic and rituals, and then prior to the traditions created by Gardner. Inspired by Gardner's work and later an Alexandrian Book of Shadows, Anderson and Penderfan, a friend of the family, formed a coven and wrote the rituals of the fairy tradition. So author Starhawk was initiated into this tradition, and some use this term for any traditions that actually honor the fairy folk. So, man, I don't know what I think of this one personally. I think it's interesting. I'd like to learn more about it, mostly because I like learning things. I don't know how much of my brain I'd probably put to it, though, just because I've got a lot rattling around up there anyways on any given day. I don't know. I've got mixed feelings about, the fairy and the fae. I think are two entirely different groups of beings. The fae being, I suppose, more Lord of the Ring-esque of fae, the proud beings that live long term, that have magic and earth power. That I can see, with the fairies being like more sprites, brownies, that kind of a thing. Two very individual and distinct groups of entities. I don't know, I'm not called to this path, so I don't understand it as much. And maybe that's part of it, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about the different traditions, to be honest. It's because we're not going to be called to each of the paths or all of the paths. We're going to be called to our own specific one, so, you got to explore it, you got to do your research, but that is why I wanted to go over this. Just, not everybody knows about all these different ones, so. The next one is eclectic, and this is kind of where I feel I am personally. So eclectic witches are those who follow no specific tradition or path, but feel free to borrow from many different traditions and cultures. An eclectic witch understands the fundamental rules of magic, but creates rituals to suit personal needs and tastes. And now these are suggestions, not hard rules. And one might be equally adept working with Celtic, Greek, Hindu, or Egyptian gods. And such a practitioner can be in a coven, solitary, or both. And this free-form style of witchcraft is one of the most popular because it grants such freedom and lacks a hierarchical structure. One can be initiated by another or perform a self-initiation ritual to the goddess and the god. Yes, you can do a self-initiation ritual. There is different documents, and you can do your research and create a ritual, or you can copy one that someone else has done. In reality, though, it's really good to have a mentor, if for no other reason than to have someone that you could just bounce ideas off of, someone to discuss things with, because often that discussion helps you brainstorm and create new ideas and new thoughts, and that's good for us. It exercises our brain and helps us to not lose track of who we are and what we're doing. And I think it's just important that we have that communal time to bond with others that are on the same path. So Gardnerian witchcraft is considered the most traditional form of witchcraft, from which most modern paths have developed. The material was from Gerald Gardner's own experience, creativity, and inspiration, along with the input of Doreen Valiente. As Gardner's fame spread and he initiated more people into the craft, his tradition moved across Britain and eventually to Europe, the US, and Australia. To be a member of this tradition, one must be initiated by another member. Now, there's a couple different schools of thought regarding the Gardnerian traditions. On some cases and in some places, they feel that Gardner was just a visionary of his time. And then others feel that he was more into the bat crap crazy. And he really didn't know what he was doing. And he kind of ran amok. So, it kind of goes back to, what do you feel called to, and doing your own personal research to find out what's going to be best for you, because not every path is going to call to every person. And that's why, again, doing this, that's why Black Tree and I have our little coffee chat. And it's we get together. None of us are on the same path or the same necessarily belief set or and follow the same traditions, but it's just a really good time to get together and discuss different viewpoints and make sure we're expanding our minds and learning. See, the next one is Greco-Roman. Most people are introduced to paganism through classical Greco-Roman mythology, which is taught in many school systems. This encounter starts a love affair in the budding neo-pagan and with these god forms, and later in life, such individuals may choose to work actively with these deities. Greek and Roman myths contain many of our first glimpses of the witch. Some speculate that the true origins of witchcraft and much of the goddess worship came from the territories surrounding Greece, such as Thrace and Thessaly. And the mystery cults of Dionysus and Demeter evoke powerful magic in our hearts. Greek and Roman covens are in existence today, but they're not necessarily unbroken lines or of a specific witchcraft tradition. They're usually reconstructions based on a Greco-Roman material, but if some Celtic family traditions supposedly survive to the present day, then perhaps Mediterranean traditions have as well. There's a lot of information out there about the Greco-Roman traditions. From there's a lot of poetry, there's essays, there's historical accountings, there's a lot of not just literature but also archaeology reflecting those different pantheons and information. And I know that when I was in school, we studied Roman history, Italy, all of that as part of our world history stuff. Looking back, though, it's like, they really kind of glossed over some of the Celtic stuff, or the Norse. But the conqueror is the one who generally does, write the history. So, not surprised that there are some holes in the education plan here in the U.S. I think most of us have noticed that. Excuse me. But I think, a lot of us do just really begin opening our eyes and questioning what's going on, or the different paths, the different traditions, kind of wondering, well, what really happened? Because, there's thousands, millions of people that believed in those gods and goddesses. That's a lot of folks to just kind of believe in imagination. So, I think there's more to it than what the history books say. That's for darn sure. So the next one is green witchcraft. So green witchcraft is a fairly broad category, sometimes used synonymously with Celtic witchcraft, kitchen witchcraft, fairy traditions, or natural or herbal magic. Now, herbalists who aren't actually practicing Wicca sometimes refer to themselves as green witches. Mostly green means they're more in touch with nature, the fauna, the flora, and the green things. They may be more closely associated with, say, the Green Man, for instance, which would be Canunos or Hern, depending on what your tradition is. And, that's just another thing, another path. Let's see. The next is a hereditary or family tradition. So hereditary witches claim lineage prior to the inception of Gardnerian witchcraft, and they state that their own individual traditions were passed on through family members, and they are hereditary witches through blood lineage. After the Witchcraft Acts were repealed, some family traditions did come out of hiding. Perhaps others remain out of the public eye and have no wish to join the witchcraft renaissance. Which I get, because like during the burning times, there's a lot of people who went underground, both literally and figuratively, if for no other reason than to save themselves and their children. And that's part of the reason why I think Christian witchcraft is an okay thing, because a lot of the dogma, I guess, associated with it is actually derivative of actual practicing hereditary type traditions, because they weren't as obvious before. Holy cow, it's break time. We'll see you in just a few minutes.
apply HydroCare to provide you with healthy, clean water for drinking, cooking, and shower. For less when it comes to your water. We'll take care of the water problem
Wild, and you are here with the Spaces Between, so thank you for coming back. Again, the phone lines are open if you wanted to give out a holler and talk about stuff. The number is 213-233-3998, or if you're in the UK, the number is 44203-393-2871. Also, if you've got a show idea or something you want to have me talk about or kind of research more, you can email me at wildpaisley@gmail.com, and that's WILDEPAISLEY@gmail.com. So, thank you again for joining me, and we were talking about traditions, so we're just going to get right back into it. Let's see. So the next one is the Radical Fairy. So it's not necessarily a formal tradition, but a loose movement of gay men seeking pagan and witchcraft spirituality, reclaiming the word fairy as a word of magic and mystery. The gatherings are generally very primal and playful, and not based on a rigid structure, but one of joy. To each their own, man. I guess if that's your thing, then by all means, embrace it. I know that there is kind of a trend in our society right now trying to reclaim different words for different things. For instance, a friend of mine got into an online argument about the use of the word warlock to describe a male practitioner of magic. And now, if you do some research, the original definition of warlock was actually oathbreaker. And so it's not necessarily a good thing to be called a warlock. In pagan and witch circles, once upon a time, that was actually you're calling someone a dirty name right there. So it's not necessarily reclaiming that particular word to be called a warlock nowadays. It's just trying to change the definition of it. Now, if that's really what you want to do, I'd knock yourself out, man. Personally, maybe I'm just stubborn enough or stuck in my ways enough that I wouldn't want to be called a warlock. To me, it's just got a very negative energy to it, negative meaning. So, I don't know, man. Like I said, whatever works, whatever trips your trigger. So yeah, just when you're trying to reclaim words that were descriptive of other things at one point, like the word gay, for instance, used to mean happy. That one's changed a fair bit. You know, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of linguistic history there that I don't know anything about, or at least not very much. But yeah, it's interesting. The history of our language is very interesting, and the way words have changed and morphed from one definition to another. Absolutely fascinating. But you know what? There's a lot of descriptive words out there that are actually positive and pretty upbeat and good, without necessarily having to really embrace a word or a name that has such a negative connotation to it. So then the next one is Seax or So, Wicca. So Raymond Buckland created the So Wicca tradition. Originally a Gardnerian and instrumental in bringing the tradition to America, Buckland founded his own tradition in the early 1970s using a Saxon heritage. So Wicca is more open and democratic in practice than either Gardnerian or Alexandrian Wiccan. Again, it's just it's kind of like a different denomination of Christianity. There's Missouri Synod Lutheran, there's Evangelical Lutheran, there's Free Lutheran. That kind of, they're all Lutherans, but they're slightly different flavors, slightly different dogmas, slightly different belief sets, and that's all it really is. They're just slightly different belief sets. So the next one is solitary. Now, solitary witches are those who practice without a coven and usually do not benefit from the training of a coven. Instead, they learn on their own from books, speaking with other witches, from nature, or the gods. Now, you can become a solitary through self-initiation, or you can come from another tradition and choose to practice alone. Solitary witches are often also eclectic witches. Makes sense. To me, I've been pretty much a solitary practitioner most of my life, just because there's not, you don't just hang out your shingle and say, hey, I want a coven. Even today, it's just not quite socially acceptable to do that. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. The Stregaria, which is Italian. So this is the practice of witchcraft in Italy, and it's called the Stregaria, and a witch is a strega. The words referred to the tradition of Italian witchcraft documented by Charles Leland, claiming a pre-Gardnerian tradition mixing ancient Roman and Etruscan practices. Some are formally initiated into the traditions, while others of Italian descent claim the word. So Raven Grimassi, the author of Italian Witchcraft, which was originally called The Way of the Strega, is greatly responsible for reviving interest in this little-known path and the major root, or a major root of witchcraft. So it's, the Strega is a big deal. Think mob with magic. That's scary enough all by itself. And I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think there's something to it. I know the evil eye is something that many Italians may discuss, or making the sign of the devil at you or something. So there's something to that. Even if a lot of those folks are very, very Catholic, they may be practicing Strega as well. The next one is Wiccan shamanism. And Wiccan shamanism is the creation of Selena Fox. She's the high priestess of Circle Sanctuary. And this path combines Wicca with core shamanic techniques, modern psychology, and a multicultural view. Rituals are akin to African or Native American gatherings with drumming and music, ecstatic trance, and personal vision work. Shamanic witchcraft or shamanic Wicca is used to refer to other practices that incorporate these ideas, but are not necessarily under the specific direction of Selena Fox. So she's someone who formed her own tradition after learning a different way, and found something that's just going to suit her needs better. So the next is not necessarily. So this next set is not necessarily forms of modern witchcraft, although they're there. But they are often associated with other magic, some rituals, and neo-paganism. So Asatru is a form of paganism strongly associated with Wicca, and where many Wiccans focus on the Celtic heritage. The Asatru are modern followers of Acer, and which is the ruling gods of Norse mythology. Asatru often focus on runic magic and sometimes classified as very conservative by other neo-pagans. Asatru focus on their own cultural heritage and do not incorporate material from other cultures, such as tarot or I Ching, though an individual practitioner might use these tools. Now, while most of the Norse path identify with Aesir in general, some use the term Vanatru as followers of the Vanir tribe of gods, and followers of Odin might take the name Odinist, and pagans of Norse tradition are often preferred to be called heathens. So if you're, I know there's quite a few people out there who just have embraced that heathen title, heathen name, just means people of the heath or rural folks. So it's not a negative thing to be considered a heathen. Brujeria. Brujeria is a witchcraft tradition from Central and South America. Women are brujas and men are brujos. And like their European counterparts, they work with natural magic through herbs and charms, and healing through magic and folk remedies. Though this role and function of the bruja is nearly identical to the witch, this tradition bears no direct connection to the evolution of Wicca, other than growing interest for those who are exploring the witchcraft traditions of the world. Now, there's a lot of negative misinformation from Hollywood, all over the place, of course, but especially when it comes to the brujo or bruja, excuse me, because they're practicing their own magic, but this is kind of where people are worried about the more Creole type magic, the voodoo almost, or Vaudoon. They're not, though. They're their own group. Let's see. The Celtic Reconstructionist can actually be applied to almost any cultural tradition. The term is used to differentiate the Celtic Reconstructionists from Wiccan traditions, because they seek to follow the ancient Celtic traditions as closely as possible based on modern scholarly knowledge. Now, if practiced such as a formal magic circle, it's not documented in surviving literature and myths, then it is ignored in favor of something more verifiable. So mostly they're trying very, very hard to stick to the original roots of the Celtic traditions, which again is hard because so much of it was verbal. It was an oral tradition. There wasn't a lot written down. Ceremonial magic refers to many different traditions, but most are usually based on the Kabbalah, Hermetics, Masonry, alchemy, or the work of various factions of the Golden Dawn, which also used all of these. Thelema, the tradition of Aleister Crowley, is grouped with ceremonial magic. Now, ceremonial magic is also called high magic, while witchcraft is called low magic. And high and low just refer to levels of technical knowledge, not power. And practitioners often refer to themselves as magicians or mages, not witches. But some witches have incorporated elements of high magic into their own practices. Ceremonial magicians are often pagan, but do not have to be. So there is a school of thought that feel that ceremonial magic or high magic was often considered the magic of the upper class, with low magic being more of the peasant. Not so much because one was stronger than the other, but the high magic or the upper class looked down upon the others, which would be lower class. And that's just a cultural thing. Not necessarily true, just a cultural thing. So it depends, again, on what you think and what is something that you identify with. The next is chaos magic, and this is more of a philosophy rather than a tradition. And it grew out of English occultism in the 70s and 80s, and in many ways it was inspired by Aleister Crowley. But his work was not quite as important as his life. So, unpleasant to many, his life was an exercise in experimentation. From the varied experimentation, he created a continually evolving worldview, his own tradition that changed as he changed. Though he set his works as a guide for others, and if we follow his example, we would not take his work verbatim, but make our own tradition based upon our own experiences. Chaos magic embodies an anything goes attitude, similar to the popular sneaker commercial slogan that says, "Just do it." So theorizing about magic is fine, but do it, experiment, and use whatever works. Do not be attached to a specific system. So sources for material cannot be only found Celtic once, and then today, and then Greek the next, but also Star Wars and Cinderella. So if a pop culture image works for you, then use it until it doesn't work anymore, and then try something new. Chaos magic grew out of ceremonial magic and favors the modified use of symbols and sigils, but branches off wildly from that point. It's also considered eclectic magic to the extreme. So, and out of control, wild, crazy, yeah, that would be chaos magic. Or, yeah, very, very, very eclectic to the extreme, for darn sure. The next one is Druidism. So Druidism is currently a pagan reconstructionist movement based on the teachings of the Druids. The Druid revival started as early as the 1600s and continues through to today. While the word Druid implies one who is specifically following a Celtic path, using Gaelic in rituals, early Reconstructionists also applied a much broader definition of the word, incorporating Christianity and Masonry into the practice with little knowledge of the pagan Celtic culture. Many in reality did not consider themselves pagan groups, but more of a philosophical society, and they're generally not quite as common today. Now, the groups are organized in groves rather than covens, and there are quite a few large druidic organizations. There's a big international group of the druidic path. So just Google it. Some good information there. As eclectic, I do draw from many traditions. And so, yeah, I find a lot of the aspects of Druidism, for instance, is very, very interesting. Not my path, but very interesting. The next one is Egyptian. So Egyptian magic is alive and well in the 21st century, though it's gone through several changes. Like so many ancient mystic traditions, no one's quite sure exactly what the Egyptian practices were, but neo-pagan groups have reconstructed traditions based on the Egyptian myths, texts, symbols, and ancient mysteries. Many contemporary pagans are drawn to the image of Isis and Osiris as the divine mother and father, even if they do not practice in an Egyptian tradition. You might see the Eye of Ra. I see a lot of folks sport that or carry it or wear it or tattoo it. And it's, the age of the Egyptian faith is coming back a little bit. And it's fascinating. Again, though, a lot of what we know about the Egyptian tradition comes from archaeology, not so much handed down. It's just a fascinating thing. I love reading about Egyptian archaeology. So Santeria is a religious tradition that was brought to the Americas from Africa through the slave trade. Focusing particularly on the Yoruban tribes, the word comes from the Spanish word santo, which means saint. And this faith contains a pantheon of gods called Orishas. And when in the New World, the Orishas were disguised as the saints because the slaves were forced to convert to Catholicism. The religion is the practice of honoring and caring for the Orishas, which brings blessings. Priests and priestesses conduct ceremonies, healings, and blessings, making magical charms and speaking with spirits. The role is congruous with the witch or shaman. This is a very strong faith that is often associated with the Hispanic or African American population. And it's, again, very, very fascinating to read more about it. Shamanism is the next one. So shamanism is the magical and healing practice of Native American cultures. The word shaman is actually Siberian, but refers to the medicine women and men of the indigenous people in Siberia and North Central and South America. Shamans enter a trance state, often through the use of meditation, drumming, dance, or psychotropics, to pierce the spiritual veil and commune with spirits, ancestors, and power beings, to bring wisdom, healing, and energy to their community. Shamans are part religious leader, part lore keeper, doctor, herbalist, and counselor. Now, anthropologists have noted that these roles were filled by similar people across the world, coining the term core shamanism to distinguish between the traditional American shamans and their global counterparts. Since the general belief is that Ancient witches were the shamans of Europe. Modern witches can look to the practices of the Americas to find missing links in the Wiccan heritage. I know there's a lot of information out there on Native American cultures here in the U.S. And a lot of the mythology there is just really fascinating. I love reading about the different stories with the different spirit guides there. Vaudoon, or voodoo, is a polytheistic religion with roots deep in Africa, but was brought to the New World via slave trading in French colonies like Haiti and New Orleans. The practice is similar to Santeria, though Santeria has a decidedly Spanish flavor. The gods of Vaudoon are called Loas, which means laws, and they are linked to the Catholic saints. Through the practices of Vaudoon and Santeria are not a witchcraft per se, they do serve the same function as witches in these transplanted African societies. Thanks largely to Hollywood, Vaudoon is the only religion with a stigma worse than witchcraft, but the African traditions are quite loving, healing, just like the craft. Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff on Hollywood that talks negatively about Vaudoon or voodoo. So there are other traditions, of course. There's Sumerian, Finnish, Slavic, Hindu, Asian, and Polynesians. Some subscribe to the name witch or Wicca, most do not. There are other traditions, associations, churches, groves, and covens that exist, all practicing their own brand of the mysteries. And the neo-pagan resurgence gives us all the spiritual freedom to devise magical tradition we want, and to claim the heritage, names, and titles that serve our highest good. So even though it's always important to know where your practice comes from, the most important factor is to know where it's going. Again, so one of the things I love talking about is the history of the different parts of the pagan path and witchcraft. Because if we don't know what our history is, we don't know what's come before us. How can we move forward and create new things if, without building on the knowledge and experience of the past? Now, I did get a bunch more information here on some other traditions, just because I thought it'd be interesting. Because there's in the U.S. there's just not as much knowledge and understanding of foreign faiths as I would like to think that we have or might see. Now the old religions from the continent of Asia, which includes the Chinese, Mongolian, Japanese, and Korean, are generally polytheistic. So that means they believe in multiple deities, and they're usually assembled in a pantheon of gods and goddesses, along with various different religions and rituals. So some of the Far Eastern types of religions are like Taoism, Confucianism. Oh gosh, I'm going to bugger names all over the place. Shinto, Buddhism, Chentao, Kaodai, and some I'm not even going to try to pronounce. Oh my gosh. But most of these focus on the East Asian concept of Tao, also known as the Way. They're often comparable to Abrahamic religions and Indian religions. So East Indian religions are dominant in China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and other companies with that same cultural sphere. Goodness. A bunch of little words. The font on this is horrible. If you listen to the Paranormal Portal, Brent and Don read stories of various paranormal happenings across the country, and I hear them discuss the font size of so many of these different stories because, oh my gosh, I don't know what people are thinking when they write in 0.6 font. It's just horrible, and it's hard to read, and it doesn't always translate well, especially, I suppose, it may be partly because that information was written in a different language and then translated into English poorly, because there's a lot of that. But yeah, it's just, I don't know, interesting. So I'm just trying to read quickly through here. I didn't highlight enough, I think. So basically, a lot of the Eastern religions also have a lot of ancestor worship. If you've seen Mulan, I've got children and grandchildren, so I've seen it on more than one occasion. They talk about the ancestors. They have spirit guides also, which are often take the form of various creatures. You've heard of the year of the monkey, year of the lion, that kind of thing, and it's just fascinating. But they also honor their elders, and I think that's something that perhaps we here in the U.S. or in Western religions need to do just a bit more of, because those are people that have gone before us. Those are the foundations to who we are today. And why would we not want to honor that and respect that? I think it's just important. And yeah, Weird Desk, it's crazy small font. But a lot of the Asian practices are very Taoist based ceremonial magic. And they often have similar tools to a lot of our more contemporary pagan practices in witchcraft, like the athame or ritual knife. They may actually use a sword because they handle those better than we do here in the U.S., in theory. And they may or may not incorporate tarot cards. They may use tiles instead of cards, or other tools. And it's just, again, going back, do your research, learn some things. There are a few contemporary movies that incorporate different aspects of Taoism, actually. If I remember right, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody who's listening, if you're a Jedi Knight, you're kind of a follower of Tao. So yeah, it's just fascinating. The Hindu faith, actually, and just moving on, is also fascinating. And wow, I'm almost out of time. It's been a fast hour, you guys. It's so one of the key thoughts with Hinduism, just real quick, is the belief in the soul, and they have a philosophy that all living creatures have a soul, and they're all part of the supreme soul, and the goal is actually to achieve salvation, or moksha, which ends in the cycle of rebirths to become part of the absolute soul. So they believe in multiple reincarnation until you've achieved what you've needed to achieve in your rebirths. So we'll be back again tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Pacific time. Please join me. I'll either be on TFR, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, TalkStream Live, or here on YouTube. You can email me again at wildpaisley@gmail.com. That's wild, WILDE, PAISLEY @gmail.com. Check out the podcast. Check out the YouTube. And don't forget Etsy. It's www.etsy.com/shop/monarchmtn studio. So merry meet and merry part and merry meet again.